Ja. Schönen guten Abend. Eine sehr, sehr kurze Vorstellung wird es jetzt geben. Ein bisschen außerhalb des literarischen Programms, aber doch nicht ganz, weil unter Literatur sind heutzutage ganz viele Genres zu verstehen. Graphic Novels, Comics seinerzeit genannt, gehören auch dazu. Es hat sich glücklicherweise ergeben, dass Maxim Trudolyubov heute eine kleine Bildgeschichte vorstellen wird. Ich sage gar nicht mehr dazu, weil er das selber erzählen wird. Maxim Trudolyubov, war eigentlich einmal als Journalist sehr bekannt, als Max Trud kennt man ihn mittlerweile auch als Künstler, und er wird seine Bildgeschichte mit einem sehr, sehr komplizierten Namen jetzt selber vorstellen. Und ich bitte ihn um seinen Vortrag. Sie sehen, werden Bilder sehen, und er wird diese Geschichte erzählen. Well, welcome, Maxim.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm going to be speaking English. So that's a story of someone who's been doing art for a long time, but had a kind of a break year, which was actually about 20 years, when journalism started in Russia, and when it became so interesting and so exciting, so that I became an editor and a writer since early 2000s. That was the time when Russia actually opened up. It wasn't the 90s, my thinking is, but more like the 2000s. And we started a project, a daily newspaper. I was one of the founders. And so we essentially created a business daily from scratch in partnership with the Dow Jones and the Financial Times. And so it took us, that was a journey roughly, yes, 2 decades, during which free journalism, independent publishing, thinking was very much possible in Russia. I am witness to that. I practiced that. It kind of sounds hard to believe now, but that was true. That was one of the, I suppose, one of the most independent, free-thinking enterprises during that time. We were incredibly fortunate because we had these publishers who were overseas. They were in Britain, in the US, and they really didn't take any interest in what we were doing. They, for as long as the newspaper functioned according to their standards, standards of free journalism, and produced income, produced profits, which we did. And then it ended roughly 2015, 16, when they started to squeeze out independent journalism in all seriousness. And that was the time when essentially I quit and worked for a little while in Washington, DC, in Berlin, and gradually, for the past, let's say, 3 years, I think, I started to get back to my art, which was always with me, but sort of some other things took preference. I was supposed to be an architect, but again, because of the events and because of all the interesting stuff that was happening in Russia and all the hope that we could actually, we really believed that we could have contributed to Russia's development in the kind of direction which in the end wasn't taken, but at the time, during the 2000s, probably early 2010s, that was still possible. But I'm not going to talk about that. That's completely separate. It's just an introduction, basically, to explain what happened and why I'm doing this. So I'm doing this art because I'm doing art. It doesn't need any additional explanation. But my thinking, sort of post factum, is that political language is something problematic. I came to a conclusion, or I started thinking in that direction for a few years recently, once I realized that political language in itself, political setting, political parties, political campaigning is something that is built on othering. And this is an innate, inevitable feature of this sort of language. If you are political, if you think in political terms, you almost inevitably end up defining yourself as somebody who's not that other guy, somebody who's not the other, because that's a party, political party. You are part of the party. It happens everywhere. There's really no fundamental difference between democratic or authoritarian system in that respect. But, of course, there is a difference in the case of authoritarian political systems. The party in power essentially is othering everyone else, and you end up being labeled a foreign agent, for example. You're not labeled as a member of a competing political force, but you are labeled as somebody, an outcast, essentially, somebody who's foreign, somebody who's not part of this country. I am personally, by the way, unfortunately, am a foreign agent according to the Russian authorities. Something I do not agree with. I'm not, obviously, but their thinking and their legislation, which they create in a completely arbitrary fashion, is like this. They essentially write political slogans into legislation. So it's not real legislation, but since they possess all the levers of sovereignty, they can make people, in a way, obey their laws, which are not real laws, but unfortunately, there are consequences. And in my particular case, just like in many, everyone else who's a foreign agent or an undesirable, it's simply dangerous to travel back home. Anything can happen. But this is not the point right now. So basically the point is that political language is divisive. And it's particularly today, if we look at any campaign anywhere, and now just because we are talking in October 2024, there is a political campaign, presidential election campaign unfolding in the United States, and we can see that basically the one thing that is common to all the participants is fragmenting society, segmenting, building their campaigning on targeting, on grouping people according to the kind of demographics, identities that those sociologists, campaign managers define. And so society essentially is presented as a collection of many, many, many groups. The same thing's happening in social media, where everyone lives in those echo chambers of like-minded individuals. And the funny thing is that in social media, you don't have, in the free world, I mean, outside of all those autocracies, in the free world, in the democratic countries, people still have, in a way, censorship, but it's not performed by any authorities. It's performed by people themselves, by users of those social media, because they ban each other. And those who are not like-minded, those who think different, they are banned, essentially, out of this little group. And then with time, those little groups solidify and become really homogeneous. So political language is divisive. And this got me thinking. I've always been fascinated by other ways of communicating, including communicating about the issues, social issues, power structures, gender issues, everything that makes people tick, everything that's important. And the language of political slogans, political campaigning is not the only possible language. And in fact, it's been with us like forever. It's actually probably the longest existing way of thinking and speaking about social issues. Since actually tens of thousands of years, humans were thinking about themselves through animals in a way, because animals were both a threat and a prey and something that they needed to deal with. And they tried to define themselves through animals, comparing different animals to each other and building tales, stories, creating stories about relationships between humans based on characters they sort of assigned to animals as symbols, as images. And if you look into, let's say, history of writing, you will see that drawing images, drawing animals in particular, came first, and writing came after that. So actually writing evolved from drawing, very often drawing an image of an animal, which is well studied, and it's actually how it happened. So there is an alternative language, and it's kind of fundamentally ancient. It's something that came first. It came before division in a way. And here is a bit of a confession in a way. When I was a political journalist, I've been always thinking that not being direct, not being fully defined as a part of some political force, not being fully open about your ideological line, about your thoughts on freedom and fear and persecution. So not being that was despicable. I looked down on people who would try and avoid direct political statements. It's a long tradition, not in the sense we were talking about before, but still quite a long political tradition which praises openness, straightforwardness of political argument, and loathes doublethink, fearfulness, evasion of direct statement, of alignment. And that was one, it ran like a thread through my career as an editor. For a long, long time I was an editor of opinion pages. So essentially I was responsible for editorial columns and opinion columns and expert pieces, things like that, opinion pages in a daily newspaper. So I was actually responsible for direct political speak that would, by definition, avoid and look down on doublespeak, on something that's unreflected, something that is not sufficiently reflective in the sense of it's too unformed. It's just people talking. It's just people telling stories, tales, very often jokes, just retelling stories about past events. In previous times, in previous iterations of that, if you go back in time, we end up with fables, Aesopian fables. This tradition coming from ancient Greece, in a way, is a good example of that thinking. At that time, including in democratic polities, only very few people, free citizens, essentially men with property and standing within polities, within these little republics, only they essentially had the right and could afford to speak directly, to accuse somebody, to charge people with things, to point fingers and to call a spade, to be open about their political position. But they usually were a tiny minority within any given political unit of the time. Most of the people would just speak in this normal everyday language, and fables were actually quite popular. That was a mass literature of the time. Some scholars say that even those parables in the New Testament are also an example of this indirect speech. Parables are not direct. Parables do not require to name the names, to call a spade, to call to resist, to go against this political power that be, whatever it is, be it a republic or a Roman Empire or any other empire. So throughout most of history, in most political systems, the majority wouldn't be able or couldn't afford to or didn't want to or didn't have the means to, didn't have enough education, didn't have enough stamina, or even the very concept of talking this direct political language. People would just retell tales, exchange stories, and speak about a hare and a tortoise, or the ant and the cicada, just to talk about how it's important in life to be prudent, and it's better than being unprudent, and it's better to save some effort and to save money and resources to be safe in life, and it's not good to, like the cicada, to dance around and sing and not being prudent. Very often that would be like a critique of social structures rather than political structures, but even political structures would also very often be the target. And this is an entire universe of evasion, avoidance of clear political standing. It's a way of it's an escape, and it happens for all kinds of reasons, obviously. And what I realized at one point, that it's not despicable. You cannot really look down on that. People are not supposed, or let's say, you cannot really expect everyone to be clearly politically defined, clearly aligned along very strictly drawn political lines. Most people just don't do that. Most people just, they don't feel, they don't think in these terms. They're not politicians. They're not aristocrats. They're not running for office. And to them, these lines, these borders, these boundaries are artificial. They don't really want that. And this produces, to me, I think, produces a different kind of resistance. It's the kind of resistance that is not a resistance of those courageous ones, those who are heroes. This is very much unheroic, this kind of resistance. Again, it's evasion. But most people do that. And the language of these people are stories, jokes. I remember that let's say in this book by Alexei Yurchak, It Was Forever Until Was No More, it's a study of late couple decades of the Soviet Union, and it's always been funny to read about those jokes. The late Soviet Union was burgeoning with jokes, lots of jokes. People were telling jokes about everything. And he says there, because he's an anthropologist, that was his study, that was not this kind of resistance we think when we think resistance, like heroic resistance. It was the resistance of the weak. It's a way of coming to terms with an unfortunate reality you have to deal with. It does not lead to protest. It actually makes protest less likely, and in every authoritarian system you would know that unless people speak directly and just tell jokes, normally they're fine. Obviously, yes, you can get, if the joke is too bad, yes. But generally speaking, even the kings and presidents and general secretaries would like a good joke. It's safe. And basically the story with me, with my thinking, is that at some point I stopped looking down on people who are not able, cannot afford, do not know their way in political divisions, and just recognize and admit that they're weak, they have no resources, they have no foundation, they have nothing to protect them in case they start and go against the system. Again, this is deeply, deeply unheroic, but it's the reality. People just avoid things. People don't, most of the time, don't really call a spade a spade. They don't call a dictatorship a dictatorship. They just go on. And that's why jokes or funny stories about or from the past, even fairy tales, easily attract their attention. In today's Russia, for example, which was really funny, I didn't realize that, but I just checked that for the past 2 years, roughly, there is a huge chunk of Russian movie production that is fairy tales. And that's for obvious reasons. This is safe. This is sort of culture. This is kind of national culture. So the censorship authorities do not, in most cases, don't object. They need to support national movie industry. So it's kind of okay for everyone. And again, is this despicable? Does this mean that everyone is openly so unheroic, doesn't want to fight, doesn't want to protest, doesn't want to overthrow a very, very obviously unfair, arbitrary, authoritarian regime? It's a question. But to me, basically what happened is that I stopped thinking about these this non-political stance as something despicable, something to be dismissed. And with this thinking, all these pictures I'm showing here, these artworks, they accompanied me in a way, because this is the language which does not require taking sides, does not involve divisions. I noticed that on my own experience, when you write, you very often get nervous, and because you're trying to define some things, you're trying to find the best language for the kinds of thoughts you have. And because most of my writing is political writing, it's political commentary or analysis, you really have to be very strict, and you have to be very precise in most cases. And this is a very good exercise, maybe for your cognitive abilities, but at the same time, it's taxing, it's hard, and also divisive. But whenever I get back to my drawing desk, or my actually drawing floor in most cases, it's completely different. I feel different. I've never studied neuroscience, but it's clear to me, based on my own experience, that when you produce images, by the way, regardless of whether you do it like hand painting or you do it on using some of those digital tools like Procreate or Photoshop or whatever it is, producing images is different, and it creates a different feeling, and it doesn't feel like a pressure. It doesn't feel like a burden. It sort of overcomes divisions. I don't know what is the end result, the outcome, and how good or artistically fine the works are, but I know that the process of producing art is very, very different on some fundamental level. It's looking at the world through a different prism, very different, and it kind of pre-divisive. It's like looking at the world before we learned that we have to get into groups and fight each other and produce and create these echo chambers, these angry little mobs who attack each other. And essentially, the thrust of my artistic project, its idea, is to show that this sort of language, an alternative language, actually exists. That's it. It doesn't overcome any divisions in itself, but it just gives you a lens, just gives you a pair of glasses to look at the world differently, and just think about the fox and the rabbit, the hare and the tortoise, the crow and the fox, and whatever it is, or many of those biblical parables and proverbs and stories. That's why this language, which I use in my artistic production, is in a way what I'm trying to say. I think is that drawing animals, reflecting on those ancient fables, on stories about the fox and the rabbit, kind of makes me laugh sometimes, and it's so basic and it's so simple. And in itself, it's this art to me itself. This is my story. It means that I stop for the moment, for the duration of this work, artistic work. I stop being a political animal. I'm just an animal, just a being, and the life that's reflected in all those ancient stories is not like it's not paradise. It often portrays quite cruel episodes of interactions between creatures, but it's very different. It's devoid of those societal partitions, borders that were created within the sort of political thinking that came later. It doesn't really mean that. Yeah, I really love. I'm showing these pictures with the fox and the rabbit, and this is roughly maybe a wolf and a sheep. Why? Because there are biblical images. Isaiah, for example. Isaiah 11, chapter 11, is a very famous passage on a vision of this imaginary future, in which the wolf will sit down or just lay down and talk to the sheep, and the lion will embrace the lamb. It's not a real future, but it's thinking about an idealized world in which predators are no longer predators and prey is no longer prey. And it just shows that there is a view, there is a lens, there is a way of thinking about the world in which very natural divisions, very natural hierarchies stop to exist. And I'm very attracted to that thinking, artistically, not intellectually, artistically. And that's why these images appear here. And yeah, that's it. So that's the kind of thinking that supports my, the strange artistic exercises that I do. But I do it anyway. So some thinking, I guess, should be there, because in a way that's my trade, that's my job, to think and write. So I have to do it, and that's why I kind of came up with some kind of an explanation or a narrative about these pictures, these artworks, which obviously don't need to be accompanied by any narrative, but I provided it anyway, because that's what I do. So I think it's been a little bit too long, but
it's okay.
Yeah? But yeah, that's the story.
You just have to show the pictures. Do they exist in an electronic way, or are there only the drawings?
I mean, this one. This one is actually a book with pictures. It's a story. Oh, I can tell. Do we have time? What time is that?
Yeah, we have. Go on.
So it's a story. It's a story. I can tell the story briefly. So the Fox and the Rabbit. It started when I picked up by accident. Picked up a book about Machiavelli and Leonardo da Vinci. They both were from Florence, and they at some point they interacted. They spent 2 or 3 years simultaneously in this city. Machiavelli was young. Da Vinci was already sort of a recognized artist. And this is a serious historical study, but it tells a very funny story, actually. So this historian, he found out that Machiavelli and Leonardo, they had a project together. Leonardo loved being an engineer and sort of a grand strategist of sorts. And Machiavelli was a politician. He was an official in the Florentine Republic. And at the time, everybody was talking about the New World, because the discovery of the United States, the New World was still fresh. It just happened, like a decade before that. And even one of the relatives, Machiavelli's relatives, actually already went there and actually saw it with their own eyes. But they were landlocked. Florence, as a state, as a country, was landlocked, and they had their dead enemies in the Republic of Pisa, which was just right next to them. But they had a seaport, and Florence didn't. So Leonardo suggested that why don't they, and because he's an engineer and architect and actually everything. So he suggested that they dig a canal, essentially, and they redirect the river, the Arno River, which flows through Florence, and flood part of the Pisa Republic and create a land corridor to the sea and sail to the New World and become very, very rich and essentially become an empire. And it's true, and they actually managed to persuade the authorities that they will do it. The last minute, Leonardo escaped and said that he didn't want to be the face of the project, official project, the grand architect of this. So they had to hire somebody else, some kind of waterways master of Florence. And this person wasn't really good at planning, and so essentially, cut the long story short, it failed. It failed spectacularly. It flooded not the way they wanted, and it all failed. And the one thing that both gentlemen wanted is to hide the story, because they were both embarrassed. And they're geniuses, they're kind of licensed geniuses. Leonardo is the genius artist, Machiavelli is genius kind of political thinking. He's essentially created political thinking, maudern political science, if you will. So after that, Machiavelli lost his job, not immediately, but with time, and essentially became a political theorist. Whereas Leonardo just wanted to forget about it all. But so here the Fox is sort of the people who read the story and see the pictures don't need to know any of that. I'm just telling it. So basically, the Fox is the politician, Machiavelli. The rabbit is the artist. Basically, it's Leonardo. So he comes up with the idea. The rabbit always, he's an intellectual. Machiavelli is a politician. And so this is a story about a politician and intellectual. Intellectual comes up with ideas, the politician tries to implement them, and in every chapter they fail. This is the first chapter, so this is the story of the flood, and they end up floating because everything is flooded. But they never give up. They don't despair. So in the next chapter, they create something else. They fail again. My working title is the Grand Strategy. So every chapter is a story of a big project that fails in the end, but they create a different project next time. So in the next chapter, for example, because they want an empire, essentially. They want power. They want to go outside of these little tiny countries that they have. So they want to conquer others. Then in the next chapter, they think that they can create a sort of a propaganda machine because they want to go through, not through brute force, but through stories again. So they persuade the birds. The fox is fired, dismissed after the story. But then in the next chapter he comes back and he explains to the prince that was the project idea. Essentially it was an agricultural revolution because they flooded all the soil, and the soil became, more fertile, and because of the rivers, all the things that contained in the river, and actually the harvests improved, and so he was hired back, and then they decided to now they have a better harvest. They have a lot of bird seed, and they decided that they will give bird seed to birds in exchange for the birds going all over the world and telling the story of the best principality on earth. The birds go outside and fly, and yes, they create a document. The fox writes this sort of like a propaganda manifesto in a way that the birds are supposed to carry all over the world, and they were expecting that everyone will love them and they will become, the talk of the animal kingdom. But what the birds did, they went throughout the animal kingdom, and they told their relatives and other birds that there is free seed in the fox's principality, and so all the birds from all the animal kingdom descended on this principality, and that they ate all the seed, and the fox was fired again, etc., etc. So anyway, so that's the project. It's in work in progress. Okay.
Probably we just get an answer what the other Russia is. Probably it was a story in an Aesopian way, or is it Russia? As you call it, a great strategy. Probably it is the other Russia you were talking about.
And this is an unpopular view, and it's really not a heroic view. But I just feel solidarity with people who don't talk this direct political talk. People who have fear, people who don't have the resources, people who don't have the knowledge, education, or willingness to engage in political debates. Obviously, this is, I mean, I know this is, in a way, this is wrong, because you need education, you need to study civics, and you need to understand how society works and how political parties work and what is the best way to build institutions. And but in actual real life, people are scared or just lazy. And I just feel solidarity with that. I read all the studies about Russians, today's Russians in Russia, and I don't want to talk about it. But if I talk about it, it will be political, and I will have to say that I'm disappointed with my fellow Russians. But I just, at this with this part of my brain, wearing these glasses, I just don't want to talk about that, and I just feel solidarity with them, because we're all weak. Nobody has to be a hero. Just there's no such people just don't. It doesn't mean that heroes are we discount heroism. No. We just say that most people don't do that. And they have different ideas about life, very often for reasons that have nothing to do with their kind of strict thinking. They just do it. It's like proto-political. It's pre-political. It's just there.
Well, I didn't just like your apology of weakness. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Listening to you, I got the impression it's a very heroic story. Besides what you said just now, unsatisfied with your fellow citizens. But this kind of apology of weakness and preventing direct conflict sometimes is a really serious and great story. On the other hand, and you mentioned it yourself, when you just have to ask afterwards, I put it in a very pathetic way, is this enough for Russia to save the face which Russia already lost also, this kind of weakness? You see what I mean?
Yeah, if I understand it, well, political Russia is a political regime and actor and player in world politics. Is, to me, again, when I say this, my attitude is very clear. It's very obvious. It's published. I don't know. It's actually quite simple, because it's so openly aggressive and so openly terrible, criminal, that you don't really need to be very courageous or intellectual to recognize that. Yes, but most people who live in Russia are, well, it's an atomized society. But again, I don't want to go into sociology. But people are weak, and everyone is weak, and most people are weak, and most people are conformist. We are not. Most of us are not heroes. Most people conform. It's just there are some places, some countries, some societies where your conformism would be fine, because you have social structures that support that, and it's decent to be conformist in some countries. in some societies, because you just would be a conservative officially. You support the Conservative Party, for example. But in some places, like Russia, being conformist immediately sounds like being somehow despicable, somehow bad, morally wrong. And this is a problem, I think, because people who live in Russia or China or Iran or Turkey, most of them are just like everyone else, and their conformism is the same conformism in nature as the conformism of Russians. It's just that we have the misfortune of having a regime that is waging a barbaric criminal war against a neighboring country. But the actual foundational structures of being conformist are the same. These are the same people who would prefer to tell jokes or talk about the rabbits and the foxes than about the things that we expect them to talk about, I think. This is weak. And from your political with wearing my political hat, I would condemn that. But wearing my artistic hat, I wouldn't.
Thank you, Maxim Trudolyubov. Thank you for your attention. Probably we continue this talk tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock in the morning. It's quite early, I know, but this will be the matter for tomorrow's talk, and I hope you will come tomorrow.
Okay, will do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.